Sam, and I'm making this video today about a subject that's pretty interesting. It's about the possibilities of war and the over the next few months to the next year, and in fact mainly through the summer and into the later part of this year. This is really going to be some world predictions based on the astrology of 2017, where we are, where we're going to be going throughout the rest of this year. And I have some historical perspective as well, and I'll be sharing some of that stuff along with my predictions and some history. So we're here now in April 20th, 2017. That's when I'm recording this video. So I just want to, I might be jumping around a little bit, but I want to show a few things that are very important. And I talked about some of these about a month or so ago in reference to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and also the upcoming eclipse this summer. The eclipse this summer, which is going to be August 21st, 2017, we're going to have this eclipse. Rahu will be like at 7 minutes of Leo, and the sun and moon are going to be eclipsed there in Leo, and we have Rahu, moon, sun, Mercury in Leo, then Mars and Venus in Cancer. And this eclipse is going to pass through the United States. Literally, the sun will be eclipsed as it passes through the United States. It'll actually go from the west up around Oregon and then down and then exit around South Carolina. So the actual eclipse path of this August eclipse will pass within a couple hundred miles of the capital of the United States. Now, one might say, oh, well, wow, so what? Well, again, in this case study that I did earlier, this is exactly the same sort of comparison that we saw when the Reign of Terror started in France on, September 5th, 1793. Look, this is almost the exact same chart that I just had up. You have Mercury, retrograde, Rahu, Mars, Sun, Rahu, Moon, Sun in Leo, Mars, Venus in Cancer. Almost exactly the same. Then you have Jupiter in Scorpio and Saturn in Aries in the French Revolution Reign of Terror eclipse. In that eclipse, the eclipse of the sun passed through the same distance from Paris. It passed right through northern and Eastern Europe, just like this eclipse is passing through the United States. Look at the same planets here. This is August 21st, 2017 eclipse, which passes right through the heart of the United States. And this is the eclipse that happened in Paris, France, September 5th, 1793. So, obviously, this is quite telling. Why am I talking about this in relation to war and things like that? Well, gee, what do you think? Now, this didn't portend war, so to speak. It portended revolution. And the comparisons to our current day are quite obvious, right? This was in France, and the French Revolution had just begun with this. And, it started when, or this Reign of Terror began when they got rid of Louis XIV and Marie Antoinette, and then there was a lot of civil unrest, and then to establish a sort of coherence and cohesiveness, they established this, governing body that began imposing a sort of like martial law, that if you were against the revolution, they would chop your head off with the guillotine. So these were the progressives who were overthrowing the kingdom, who were then in a strong backlash against the people. So we can see the seeds of a similar kind of rebellion growing in the United States now. It could very well be seen that because this is an eclipse that we're talking about now in August, this eclipse is passing through the United States. Literally, that's the trajectory of the eclipse, just like the eclipse in 1793 passed through France. So these times are not without precedent, even though they seem like they are in the United States, with the improbable rise of Donald Trump as president. What one might call overthrowing the system, kicking the bums out, so to speak. But remember, those who overthrew the system and kicked the bums out in ancient France wound up becoming more oppressive toward the people than those who were in power. This is always what happens in revolution. It happened in the communist revolution. Even though the king was holding the people back, the communists, in order to maintain order, killed more people than the previous, than the king. So again, with all the corruption we've experienced in the United States, it was very easy, especially last year during the election season, to act like everything is just horrible, a terrible, terrible thing, just horrible country. Well, actually, people have health care, wealthiest nation in the world, all kinds of things that were really not that bad. But this idea that it was the most horrible thing in the world, and we need to throw the bums out and put this guy in here, somebody who's never been in government before, that'll be a good idea. Well, that's what we've done. And it was that kind of mentality, the sort of kick the bums out mentality, which is very similar to the French Revolution, that put this current administration in power. Now, we're already seeing so much disarray, not to mention confusion about how the government works, how to run the world, scandal, and all of these other things, that it's interesting to see how this could go, because it could also be seen that now they've been installed as a kind of royal family, especially with Trump and his kids. It's almost like a monarchy. One way or another, we're going to see in the summer, and as we get closer to the summer, we're going to see a strong backlash in the U.S. And we need to be very vigilant toward any kind of, imposition of, like I say, anything like martial law or anything by the government that starts to crack down on the citizens. We saw last month 8th house transit through Donald Trump's 8th house, rather, that he would be beset with scandal, and he was for about half the month. And then as soon as the moon went into his first house, he started firing bombs and changing the subject. Because that transit started with his former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, saying that he wanted to sing and he wanted to get immunity. And again, it looked like the Russia scandal, it could blow up at any minute. There's so much going on. But then as soon as Trump starts firing bombs, we're not talking about that anymore. Then he sends aircraft carriers and he's saber-rattling with North Korea. Notice we're not talking about the Russia problem so much in the news anymore. What it shows is there's definitely the possibility that this guy will do these kind of things to change the subject. And that's not surprising. So besides just Trump and the eclipse, I want to talk about a couple other things, because I've heard some people talk about this whole world war thing, that especially last year in the election, it was a lot of, Hillary Clinton's going to get us in a World War III and all of this. We can look at some charts of the world wars. As you see now on the screen, I have the chart of World War I. This was July 28th, 1914, which is when World War I started. With K2, Venus, Mars, and Leo. There's a lot of Leo energy with these wars. Jupiter is retrograde opposite the Sun. So we've got a Jupiter retrograde literally in the sign opposite the Sun, not just retrograde. And we have quite a few planets all on the Rahu-Ketu axis. Other than that, it's kind of unremarkable. Saturn, Mercury, and Gemini. Moon in Virgo. Then when we look at the start of World War II, and I use the chart of December 7th, 1941, which was Pearl Harbor Day, that's the day it almost officially really became a world war, because the United States and Japan got into it. We see a similar Jupiter retrograde, exactly opposite the Sun, but here in Scorpio. And we see this Rahu-Ketu in the Leo axis again. So we see a couple signatures here of world war. The two main I see are the nodal axis in the Leo-Aquarius axis. By the way, we just saw that as well with the French Revolution and the decapitation, right? Rahu-Ketu in the Leo-Aquarius axis. But of course, that was a French internal battle. But this Jupiter retrograde is also noteworthy. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, I've heard some people talking about World War III and all this. I'm not sure there's going to be another world war, because we live in a different world now. We've had 2 world wars, and they occurred at unique times in history when the world could kind of go to war, frankly. Like, we had enough technology to invade large groups, and countries could all kind of converge. The last World War ended, World War II ended, with the dropping of a nuclear bomb on Japan. Since then, we've not really even been close to a world war, because we have nuclear weapons now. A world war between the United States and another country, how does that really work? We have nuclear weapons. So the world is not under the threat of world war. The world is under the threat of nuclear holocaust. So even the idea of that, I understand the spirit, because the spirit is certainly possible. With, especially, for instance, in Syria, we have so many hot button possibilities, and 2 nuclear powers with their hand in the cookie jar. That would mean the U.S. and U.S. and Russia. But then we have it's taking place in Syria. There's Turkey with their with their hand in supporting the anti-Assad regime. I don't want to get into each faction, but Iran is also in there, and then you have ISIS, which is kind of an independent state, and not to mention anything could happen. Israel is not far away, so you certainly have the possibility of things in many places sort of collapsing. You go to North Korea, of course you have North Korea, and there's a certain détente there, meaning there's a certain peace that's established, because you can't attack North Korea, because then they attack South Korea, then we attack them, China might attack us, and so there's certainly the possibility of escalation. What we might call world war, it's a different world now. And we're not fighting conventional wars like that anymore. It would be an unconventional war that is the big fear. And again, I see the possibility of these things coming perhaps in a couple years, especially as Rahu continues to move. Another astrologer, I pointed this out a couple years ago, or last year as well, that the next time Rahu gets into Gemini and Ketu is in Sagittarius, when Rahu is in the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, it's quite volatile. We had 9/11 there. We had the assassination of JFK happened when Rahu was in Gemini. 9/11 happened then. I was born. Actually, I was. I was born about 6 months before JFK was assassinated. So that axis is quite volatile, and around the end of 2019, we're going to have some pretty intense configurations, and those eclipses will be pretty intense. Again, I don't see the threat as being world war. I see it as being something much more, final, if we're not careful, and that potential. But you could see this kind of skirmish, or this kind of escalation. But the big thing that I'm looking at, though, right now, is this destabilization, this social destabilization. This is the chart right now that you're seeing of the U.S. and the eclipse in August. If we run this chart back, there's a few other things that are not being so much discussed, especially here in late April and into May and June, that we want to look at. One of the main ones, one of the most important things that will be happening in the next month is we're going to get Mars combust. It'll actually start in early June. Mars will be combust, and he's combust for months at a time, which means he's very close to the sun. He's on the other side of the sun from the Earth at that time. Very far away from the Earth is the best way to say it. At that time. So this combustion, which will last, it starts, Mars, his combustion degree starts at like 17. Let me see, where are we at? Yeah, so somewhere around, like around the middle of June until let's go forward. He'll be combust. You see Mars and the Sun are tracking almost, they move actually almost at the same, not almost at the same speed, but they move very similar, very close to each other. And it's 1 degree, yeah, so by the time we get into, August, early August, and around the time of that eclipse, Mars will be combust. So again, between the middle of June until the middle of August, let's say for a few months, for a couple months, July, August, September, there could be a lot of volatility. Again, this is in the world. So I would not be surprised to see the President of the United States, for sure, flexing more of that, like a somewhat indiscriminate and random bombing stuff. Doing things like this to change the subject, at the very least, is not driven by policy or by any discipline. Nobody really even knows what his policy is. Not because he's, being unpredictable, Sorry. Gotta keep him guessing. It's because he doesn't have a policy. Every one of his advisors says something different, contradicting himself from one day to the next. Even things like saying there are aircraft carriers and battalions, armadas going somewhere that there aren't, saying there are submarines in the area, which we never talk about, and they're not. Again, I don't want to get into a rant here, but to say that it's because Trump has some big strategy is really kind of silly. His reason for bombing the Syrian airfields is, I saw those little babies and something had to be done. I mean, in some ways, that's a really scary proposition. Again, what he would have done before he had the power of the United States military is he would have sent an angry tweet. Now, he has the capacity to send bombs flying into other countries when he sees something he doesn't like. Think about it. Again, and notice the horror of everybody like going, well, I think it was the right thing to do, I think it was the right thing to do, and now nobody's talking about other things. And I don't just mean the Russian problem, I mean things like his healthcare bill hasn't passed, he seems to not have any sort of direction, all of these cabinet appointees that haven't been done, he's not really doing anything. The government is just, he's just not getting anything done, he doesn't know what he's doing. And if you don't believe that, just look into it. I mean, there are thousands of cabinet appointees. These are people that run the government, that need to run our diplomatic services, help the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. None of these positions are staffed. And plus he came in and fired all these people. And he's not doing anything to appoint them, because one of the things is before he can appoint someone, he has to personally approve them, and if they are anyone who has ever said anything bad about him, he won't hire them. So he can't staff the government because he's so thin-skinned. I don't want to get into a rant, but this guy is not doing his job. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't have a policy. And I think his saber rattling over North Korea is a way to just keep the military message going so that we're not focusing on something else. I'm saying this because this could be a very dangerous game, and I think he's very quick to catch on to the fact that, well, if they're talking about what a powerful, strong president I am, and they're not talking about Russia, that's good. As Mars becomes combust into June, July, August, September, and we start grinding near this eclipse, and let's say, for example, oh, I don't know, maybe something like the Russia investigation accelerates because they're getting more and more proof and evidence that there's some terrible stuff there. And I think what's really frustrating to a lot of people is most are now starting to think and realize, and myself included, that Comey, the FBI director, is probably sitting on enough to seriously call into question Trump's campaign. They have recordings of people saying all kinds of stuff, and they need to bring these people up under power of subpoena and find out what happened during that election and see if the president is implicated. By the way, the president knows what he did, and at this point he probably knows that they have some of the goods on him, or at least a certain amount. And if not, why wouldn't he just say, let's all come clean? Instead, the administration has done nothing but obfuscate and delay and interrupt and try to get in the way and stall this investigation. You only do that when you're guilty. I'm just going to say it. So you can say that's my bias or whatever, I'm just a Trump hater. Look, I'm not stupid, and I'm not going to pretend I'm stupid. Okay? How many more people talk to Russia? How many more? There's so much proof. The only reason it's not been brought out yet is because Republicans in Congress are protecting him. Anyway, so moving forward from September, it gets even more tricky. It's not just going to be on the eclipse. Okay, the eclipse happens September. We could see some very scary things start to happen, but then as we go forward, watch Mars and watch Saturn has gone retrograde back in the Scorpio. Now watch, Mars is going to join, or I'm sorry, Jupiter's going to change signs, then Mars is going to join. Here, actually, we can see in early September, Saturn is also aspecting these planets. It's a pretty wide orb. But if we go forward a week, Saturn is now aspecting the Sun, and Jupiter moves into Libra. So Jupiter's going to move from Virgo into Libra in the middle of September. Now again, Libra is the sign of social justice. And of course, Jupiter is the planet of justice, of wanting there to be fairness and equality. Jupiter has been in Virgo, where we're looking at all the details, saying, wait a minute. Jupiter goes into Libra, and then, again, let's go another week. You see Mars is now getting closer to this exact square with Saturn. It's a one-way aspect. And so as we go forward now, this period of time here, October, we could see some real nasty social unrest and some stuff in the world where we see this kind of saber-rattling, war-mongering kind of stuff. And again, one of the main things I'm looking at is in the homeland, because this is precipitating, or I'm sorry, this is following the eclipse that happened in early September. Now here we are like a month later. Saturn square Mars, Saturn aspecting Mars. Now Jupiter is getting close to combustion as well. Next week, then Jupiter becomes combust. And Jupiter's very combust, Mars is getting closer. And then, what we see is by the end of the year, see this is now October 18th, Jupiter is combust in Libra. Combustion is like frustration with Jupiter, which is teachings, leaders, people inspiring us. And it's combust in Libra, which is again wanting social justice, wanting social accountability. Now Venus is debilitated, but then we see by the end of the year also Saturn is right at the edge of Scorpio. So by this time Saturn had backed up into Scorpio again. I failed to mention that. Let me go back and show you. Just back up 2 months. So you see Saturn retrograde. This is June 20th. June 20th, Mars is already combust. June 20th, Mars is combust. Saturn is about to go into Scorpio. So Saturn goes into Scorpio by the end of June, early July. So Saturn goes back into Scorpio, right? And when he does, he starts aspecting here. So again, the end of June can be a big change. Saturn going back into Scorpio is bringing our consciousness and awareness back into all of those dark themes that were happening when, for instance, Trump was elected. That dark, paranoid time of 2016, when it was nothing but fear-mongering and paranoia, right? On both sides. Trump was saying, Hillary, Mexicans, immigrants, rapists, all this stuff. Notice how Trump hasn't been able to get those laws through. He hasn't been able to move any of that agenda through yet, because Saturn has been in Sagittarius. I said this when Saturn went into Sagittarius. I said if Trump tries to put forth this dark agenda, this fearful agenda, he's going to get, it ain't going to work. And it hasn't. It hasn't worked. We're not, at least so far, since Saturn has been in Sagittarius, we've been motivated by what inspires us, not what we're afraid of and paranoid about. Well, Saturn moves back into Scorpio. You could see things like maybe false flag events, or even just something that happens in the homeland, and the master fearmonger manipulator might start to crack down on things. We might see some big protests. If we don't see the big protests here at this time, I think we might see them by the end of the year. This is the main thing I wanted to talk about. So you see, end of June into July, Saturn goes back into Scorpio, revisiting those sort of paranoid themes. Let's go forward a few months where we were. This is October 25th. Saturn is right at the edge of Scorpio. It's about to go back into Sagittarius. A week later, November 1st, Saturn is in Sagittarius now again. Jupiter is deeply combust, only 5 degrees from the Sun. Jupiter's combustion is, I believe it's 14 degrees, 12 degrees. But Jupiter has been combust at this point for a while. We go a couple weeks further, Jupiter's not combust anymore. And by the way, the Sun is debilitated there. But then the thing I look at too is when Mars, at this time in December, Mars joins Jupiter. Middle of December. See, these times here, this could be, Jupiter moon. This new moon in Scorpio, or actually it would be in, when we get here at this debilitated moon here, like December 16th, this whole time when the moon here passes through Libra, December 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, these times, there could be some big, if not, social unrest, just this Jupiter, Mars, and Libra after the eclipse, after Saturn squaring the Sun and Mars, after Jupiter combustion, then Mars joins Jupiter, we could definitely see some major social unrest. Maybe not just in the US, in the world. You might see this social unrest even in places like Turkey, where they now have Erdogan. Other places where they feel oppressed, where they feel like there are monarchies or the elite class taking liberties. You may see some real unrest in the US for sure. And so that'll last through the end of this year. So I think the end of this year, especially December 2017 into January 2018 could be major. There could be some major unrest. Also August, September, and October, really that whole stretch. This eclipse moving through the United States is no laughing matter, and we have historical precedent for this exact kind of eclipse. You can look at it again. This is when the Reign of Terror began in France, right after the French Revolution. This is a solar eclipse in Leo. Mars and Venus in Cancer, Mercury, Rahu, Moon, and Sun in Leo. And this is the eclipse in 2017. Rahu, Moon, Sun, Mercury in Leo, and Mars, Venus in Cancer on August 21st. Almost the exact same chart. And the trajectory, the eclipse path passes right through the United States, a couple hundred miles from Washington, D.C., just like the eclipse path passed through Paris in 1793. And again, after this eclipse, then we see Mars. Mars is combust at this point. You see Mars is 26 of Cancer and debilitated, and the Sun is only 4 degrees. So Mars is very combust. As we move forward, we see Saturn squaring the Sun. It just moved out of orb a month later. Then we see Jupiter in Libra combust by the Sun. Then we see Mars within a couple months joined Jupiter. You want to know that combustion is big when it comes to frustration and things boiling over and blowing up. That's what combustion is. when planets are in that state, they're on the opposite side from the Earth. So their energy comes through the sun. So, in other words, that Mars energy is being burnt up by the sun, or the Jupiter energy burnt up by the sun. And so the combustion of Mars is going to be for months, and then with Jupiter, he'll be combust for about a month, and then he'll be joined by Mars later. So, I'm not seeing World War III. We don't have a lot of I don't know what world wars we're going to have. There's only going to be shooting for so long. With nuclear power, it's a different fear. But it's no less dangerous. We're going to be passing through a very dangerous time in the world and in the United States with these eclipses in Leo, as we've already seen at least Leo and its connection to World War. So the equivalent of what would be somewhat devastating in this modern era, as was referred to as a world war before. I don't know if it's going to be a world war, but this is the chart of World War I, and this is the chart of World War II. Both had the nodes in Leo, retrograde Jupiter. Even like we see the reign of terror begins, we have Rahu in Leo, nodes in the Leo Aquarius axis, and on the eclipse this summer we have Rahu in Leo, nodes in the eclipse axis. So it's a formidable time, and stay alert. Get out of your boxes and pay attention to what's happening. And again, you see the media spin things like crazy. You know, look beneath the surface at why things are happening. And we'll leave it at that.